Welcome back. The Arkham franchise is renowned for its amazing adaptations of all kinds of characters. The heroes, the side characters, and obviously the villains. Arkham's villains have always shone, as they do in most Batman media, because of their schemes, performances, and in some cases, downright creepiness. But no villain exemplifies all of these things more than Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow. Scarecrow made his first appearance in Batman Arkham Asylum, in one of the most memorable introductions ever, making Batman breathe in his patented fear toxin before taking the Dark Knight on a trip like never before, making him see Jim Gordon's dead body, making him talk to his parents, and worst of all, cutting his 4G off. Scarecrow is a menace. Scarecrow's involvement goes back further than even Arkham Origins. In fact, he holds one of the longest tenures of being an active villain in the series, maybe not always operating as Scarecrow, but as Dr. Jonathan Crane, arguably a more cunning evil given his relative anonymity compared to the more outlandish Scarecrow character he portrays following his firing from Blackgate Prison. The Arkham franchise always favoured other villains over Crane, reducing him to something of an afterthought 9 out of 10 times, and even in a game where he was touted as the main threat, it focused heavily on Jason Todd, leaving Crane in the background for a large majority of the game. But if we dig deeper and dig underneath that mask and behind the years of misuse and neglect, what we find is a villain orchestrating the events of the series from the shadows, playing the long game, and ultimately, when all was said and done, proving himself as the real villain of the Arkham franchise. Like the video. After years of suffering, torment and bullying from an early age, Jonathan Crane decides he had enough of feeling meek and scared, and decides to devote his life's work to studying fear. What's interesting to point out is that Crane was made fun of for his obsessive nature when it came to his studies, something people would eventually realise explains a lot when he became, well, what he became. Traces of Dr. Jonathan Crane can be found as far back as Batman's second year of crime fighting back in Arkham Origins. Posters can be found littered in the city inviting anyone with a history of depression to a clinical research study at Gotham University. And we can see he was in the infamous Blackgate Prison at the time of the first riot week while in the game's opening hour. What is he doing there? Well, as we'd find out in the next chronological game in the series, he wasn't up to any good in his tenure at Blackgate. Crane got his job at Blackgate after Tiger, yes that Tiger, felt his work and theories on the Jungian Shadow, the concept that everyone has repressed and unconscious parts of their personality they don't let out, whether it be weaknesses, strengths, evil, trauma, or even desires, or in terms that I understand Dexter's Dark Passenger, was good enough to warrant hiring him as the head of rehabilitation, replacing Professor Hugo Strange. Crane would be succeeded at Gotham University as the Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry by Dr. Penelope Young, completing our triangle of original Arkham Trilogy bad guys in key positions regarding mental health. It's here Crane, in all of his twisted glory, would create a gas which would actually induce fear into his patients. Apart from creating a literal war crime, Crane would use this to further his research into fear, and he wouldn't have to resort to other uncontemporary methods, such as firing a loaded handgun in a university class to invoke fear. Although when you put it like that, between breaking international laws on the use of chemical weapons and shooting a gun at no one in particular in a room, there's a clear winner in the ethics category. In Batman Arkham Shadow, we get our first taste of real fear as we come face to face with Dr. Crane for the first time, and he's using his prominent position in Blackgate to test his toxins out on unwilling prisoners, one of which being Arnold Wesker. And he helps them face their inner darkness and become one with it. Does that sound familiar to anyone you might know? Well, Crane's experiments were able to go largely under the radar due to the head of the prison, Lyle Bolton, aka Lockup, being a particular fan of abusing prisoners, as we find out across the runtime of the game. Crane would be given a psychological sidekick, Dr. Harleen Quinzel, and despite his disdain for her, believing her to be untrustworthy and not fit for the job, he'd accept this as it meant he'd stay under the radar enough to conduct his experiments unhindered by scrutiny, and to this end he'd begin kidnapping Quinzel's patients, claiming she was not good at her job. One of the subjects he attempted to work on was Arnold Wesker, but Batman confronted Crane and had to fight his inner demon in a mental battle for the ages. Our next encounter with Crane is a direct effect of Matches Malone, Bruce's alias as he infiltrates Blackgate to discover the Rat King's identity, using Two-Faces to discover Two-Face's third face. Genius. Anyway, Matches Malone is falsely accused of killing a police officer, and while standing trial in what has become an already iconic Arkham scene, Crane was brought in as a psych evaluation expert and tries to gas Malone, but he meets his match as the canister containing the toxin is pushed away, directly into the face of Harvey Dent, bringing Harvey's shadow into the light as the left side of his face is melted down as Harvey Two-Face is officially brought out of the shadows. Crane has a massive part to play in Arkham Shadow, but more importantly than that, before he even makes an appearance, this guy's a demon, proving he can be a main villain before he's even in the whole villainy thing. Unlike most villains, whose gimmick is their villainy, Crane is just pure evil, and I think this version of Crane is one of the most twisted and unnerving. He has no feelings towards his patients except hatred and a bit of intrigue, and I think that's a big reason the Arkham Crane is so creepy. You might notice too I'm not calling him Scarecrow just yet, and that's intentional because, well, he isn't Scarecrow yet. He will be soon, and when we get to this information we'll discuss that accordingly, but for now, Crane will do. Crane experiments on prisoners at Blackgate because they remind him of his childhood bullies, the people he blames into turning him into a monster. But I think there's a case to be made that this path was always his to walk. He clearly has no intention of using his discoveries on fear for good, and it brings into question whether he was born evil or whether his circumstances made him that way. And in Crane's case, I'm not sure whether if he took away the bullying and abuse, he'd be any better. He has no empathy and no real emotion, and above all else holds his work in higher regard than human life. So I think there is a case to be made that this was already there when Crane was born. Eventually, Crane was fired from Blackgate in a move which would arguably be one of the prison's greatest mistakes, as from the ashes of Jonathan Crane, head of psychology, rose the Scarecrow, the tyrant of terror. It's after his firing that Crane would adopt his Scarecrow persona and embark on a mission of revenge, which would bring him into direct conflict with Batman, someone who'd come to fascinate Crane, because on the outside he wasn't affected by his toxin like everyone else. The innate desire to further his research was only lit further due to the discovery of the Batman, as Scarecrow would begin researching and working tirelessly to create a batch of his fabled gas that could break the Dark Knight of Gotham. Over the coming years, Scarecrow and Batman would battle numerous times to varying results, all including Batman throwing Scarecrow back into Arkham. However, he'd escaped countless times to test whatever his latest batch of toxin was on the people of Gotham, and due to this, Batman would show up and Scarecrow had a chance to test it out on him again. Unlike his crime sprees though, the results would never vary, and Batman would be largely unaffected by Crane's work. So, we need a little science lesson to understand just how Crane's mind slowly fell into madness. Our sense of self comes from specific brain areas that link our past, present and future. A key part of this is the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, or the VMPFC, in the front of the brain, which helps us stay aware of who we are over time and connect all of the events we experience together. If it's damaged in any way, including huffing fear toxin, people may struggle to keep a clear sense of who they are. This part of the brain is essential for keeping our identity stable throughout life, and Crane's was cooked beyond belief from breathing in all of that sweet gas, which means when he says "no Crane, only Scarecrow" in Batman Arkham Asylum, he isn't kidding, he's genuinely lost it. Like, everything in his mind connecting him back to Jonathan Crane has completely gone, and he has fully embraced Scarecrow. Scarecrow continues his research, and from Thug dialogue we know he wants gas to school with his toxin. Because of course he gassed a skull with his toxin. It's Scarecrow. While in Arkham, Crane would continue his research by creating a small but functional hideout in the elevator shaft of intensive treatment, complete with maps of the asylum to make his way around. He'd also hide 3 canisters of his toxin in Arkham West in case of emergency. Crane attempted a breakout one night when Joker let everyone out of their cells, but was put back in his cell and recaptured, being assigned to one Dr. Murphy, but was later passed to a Dr. Combs for unknown reasons. But he'd begin sneaking his gas into sessions and eventually broke the Doctor with visions of his family's death. But the Arkham security actually did their job for once and stopped Crane, as the Scarecrow noted it was impossible to do any work with the guards impeding him. A month later, Crane was assigned to Dr. Stephen Kellerman. That Dr. Stephen Kellerman. And despite Kellerman's best efforts to treat him, Crane, in what I can only describe as his most annoying act, acted as if he were conducting the therapy sessions, even writing down notes and patronising Kellerman, as he toyed with his prey and told him of his theories on fear, and how everyday things in Kellerman's life could ultimately ruin him. Eventually, Kellerman got sick of Crane and noted that he was simply sadistic, not insane, and apparently there's a difference. That being that a sadistic person knows what they're doing is wrong, but just gets a kick out of hurting people for no good reason. They just enjoy the pain on the other person's face and making them as uncomfortable as possible. This isn't a mental illness, it's a personality trait. On the other hand, insanity is a mental illness and not a personality trait. It means the person might do awful things but doesn't understand what they're doing, its effect, or why it's bad. For example, Scarecrow is sadistic, Joker is insane. The two both enjoy inflicting pain, but Crane does it knowingly. Joker also does it willingly, but he doesn't have a grip on his own reality, so he can't rationalise those actions. We can hear the conversations between Crane and Kellerman, ultimately ending in Crane's defeat at the hands of Batman, in Arkham Asylum's patient interview tapes, which I'll let play out now.
Patient interview 1. Patient was referred to me after the incident with Dr. Murphy. He appears to have suffered a breakdown of sorts. I believe it was brought about after the loss of his wife and child. As yet, the patient has been unable to speak. Continued observation shows little mental activity. It's as if the shock of what he saw triggered his mental collapse.
There's someone in here! It's him. We found him. Break down the door!
Note to self, as ever, it is difficult to continue my research under such conditions.
Step away from Dr. Combs! Now! Get down on the ground! We found them. Someone get a medic. Oh, God, what's he done to him?
Patient interview 6. Dr. Crane has been back in custody for 3 weeks. Regular sessions have been inconclusive. I am not sure he is actually insane.
Good evening, Stephen. How are you tonight?
I'm conducting the session, Jonathan.
Of course. If that helps you cope, I wouldn't have it any other way.
Let's talk about the events 3 weeks ago. What did you think you'd achieve? Dr. Murphy is still in therapy.
I wanted to understand him. His personal demons, his fears. It's all quite fascinating, really.
But you were a respected doctor. A brilliant mind. Now just another resident in Arkham.
Can I have a drink? A strong one? This kind of question bores me.
I'm afraid not.
Interesting choice of words, Doctor. Tell me, what are you afraid of?
Patient interview 9. Dr. Crane continues to evade questions. I believe he is quite sane, just evil. He takes no interest in the people he has hurt. His research appears to be the only motivating factor in his life. What is it about fear that drives your obsession?
Fear drives everything, Stephen. Everything. Your life is governed by fear. Every decision you make is a product of that fear.
Don't be ridiculous.
You married your wife. Margaret, isn't it? Because you were scared of dying alone. You have children because you're scared of leaving nothing behind that really matters. You go to the doctors because you're scared of dying. Do I need to go on?
No. I think that will be all for today. Guards? Today I have another interview with Crane. I cannot say I am looking forward to it. I've been feeling anxious. I don't like to admit it, but I think he's getting to me.
How are you today?
I keep telling you, this is my session.
It was your session, Doctor, but not anymore.
Are you okay, Doc?
I think... yes,
Oh, he's fine. Just questioning his grip on reality. You should be doing the same any second.
Mom? Is that you? Wait, what are you doing?
Get off of me. Help! I need help here! I can't breathe!
Like I said, you're all part of my experiment now. Asylum interview 1. My experiment is underway. Working alone, I have created my ultimate fear gas. Its potency, a revelation.
They're all over me!
Please, Daddy.
Don't do it!
Keep on. I have pumped enough gas into the medical center to break 100 minds. If
What? Give it up. Now!
How are you still standing? How come it's not affecting you?
Who says it's not?
I knew it. What was it like? What have you seen?
Officer Cash, get this formula to the air conditioning system, now!
You failed, Crane. Again. I've been working with Dr. Kellogg in creating an antidote to the toxins in your cologne. He fooled you, Crane. How does that make you feel? Threatened? Humiliated? Scared?
These tapes provide us with a good insight into Crane himself, offering a look into the mind of the scientist behind the mask, because at the end of the day, knowing he's captured, Crane still gleefully asked Batman what he saw when he inhaled the toxin, and seemed almost excited when Batman neither confirmed nor denied it was affecting him. This shows us that the man beneath the mask is still under there somewhere, and he's struggling to come through the facade. What's most interesting is how Scarecrow, when he's defeated, is always humiliated in one way or another. Whether he's tricked, manipulated, or just physically beaten to a pulp, taking us back to his childhood where he was beaten and made fun of by bullies, and I think it's fitting that no matter the face he presents, whether it's Jonathan Crane or Scarecrow, he's doomed to face the same kind of humiliation again and again. Anyway, we all know what's coming next: Batman Arkham Asylum. In Arkham Asylum, Scarecrow gets one of the coolest introductions for a character in the series.
There's no Crane. Only Scarecrow.
Scarecrow's role in Batman Arkham Asylum is one of the most memorable and terrifying parts of the game, setting him apart as one of the game's most memorable villains. Unlike other enemies who rely on brute force, Scarecrow's power lies in his ability to manipulate fear itself, turning Batman's mind against him in the same way Batman does to his foes. His fear toxin sequences stand out as some of the most unique moments in the game. These encounters elevate him beyond just another boss fight. He becomes a true embodiment of fear, a villain who doesn't need physical strength to break the Dark Knight like a lot of villains in Arkham Asylum try and do. His first major sequence begins when Batman unknowingly breathes in Scarecrow's patented fear toxin in the elevator while tracking Jim Gordon through the medical facility, triggering a series of nightmarish hallucinations. This leads to a horrifying scene where Batman finds Commissioner Gordon's body being dragged away from him, screaming. A moment that immediately sets a darker, more unsettling tone for this section of the game. As Batman progresses though, the hallucinations get worse, forcing him to confront deeply personal fears, including his parents' deaths, where he finds them both in the morgue pleading for Bruce to save them, followed by a jump scare by the man himself. One of the most infamous moments of Arkham Asylum is the fake game crash. Don't worry, I won't fake it out like I did in my Asylum video. Or will I? This is a brilliant fourth wall breaking trick that makes the player feel just as disoriented as Batman himself. The screen glitches after a fake announcement asks if anyone saw the game last night, and the game seemingly restarts, mimicking the intro but this time with Joker in Batman's place and vice versa. This not only adds to the surreal horror, but also reinforces the idea that Scarecrow's power isn't just about causing fear, it's about making people feel completely hopeless, lost in a world they can no longer trust, because up until this point his tricks have directly affected Batman and Batman alone, not the player. With Crane now targeting the player's deepest fears of a faulty console or game disc, he begins to take on a whole new level of fear factor. What makes Scarecrow so effective in Arkham Asylum is, like I said, he preys on Batman's biggest weakness, his own mind. While villains like Bane and Killer Croc challenge Batman physically, Scarecrow's attacks are all mental based, planting the seeds of doubt and forcing Bruce to face his deepest insecurities. Like in the second encounter, where in one of the most clever moments in the game from a game design aspect, we walk through the infinite halls of the asylum, reliving the memories of Thomas and Martha Wayne's death as we begin to play as a young Bruce Wayne. This moment is punctuated by the fact we see the bat symbol cover him and his dead parents, showing the moment Batman was born in Bruce's mind. Every encounter with Scarecrow, though, is an unsettling descent into madness. From navigating the twisted landscapes of the Asylum, where a towering Scarecrow looms over you, to fighting off skeleton hordes, which turns out to be thugs of the Asylum. Every time Batman coughs, we know we're in for a ride. Despite not being the game's main villain, I'd argue Scarecrow is the most unforgettable villain. His sections feel different from anything else in the game, almost like stepping into a psychological horror experience, like being transported into Outlast mid-game, having to escape the seemingly inescapable prison of our own mind as we try to avoid the ever-looming monster hunting us. He doesn't just challenge Batman, he challenges the player, making them feel as vulnerable and disoriented as the Dark Knight himself. His presence in Arkham Asylum is a masterclass in horror storytelling, proving that true terror comes not from monsters or brute force, but from losing control of your own mind. A fact further driven home as Batman begins to turn the tables on Crane, and makes him lose his mind, as Batman resists enough toxin to kill any man as he asks Batman what he even is. Scarecrow, though, comes to meet a near untimely death, threatening to drop toxin into the sewers, which would eventually make its way into Gotham. But the greatest Batman villain of all time, Killer Croc, hears the commotion and takes Scarecrow out, grabbing him as Batman electrocutes Croc's collar as he dives into the water with Crane in his grasp. But continuing his string of bad luck, Crane is taken into Croc's lair, ready to be eaten, but is only saved when Croc hears Batman's footsteps on the wooden planks above, ultimately leaving Crane to die of his injuries in pursuit of a more plentifully filling meal: Batman. Arkham Asylum Scarecrow sections are genuinely some of the most memorable sections in the series, and still stand aside some of the finest moments of psychological storytelling in Batman media, turning the Dark Knight's mind into a prison within the prison. Something I want to touch on, which I thought was an interesting thing to point out, is that during the sections where Scarecrow brings in skeletons to fight, they all go down in one hit. We later find out that these skeletons are thugs of the Asylum trying to jump Batman in his fear toxin-induced state. But what's interesting is the fact that we see in Batman Arkham Knight that the fear toxin makes Batman more aggressive. Whether this is due to the Joker in his mind or just an effect it has on him, either way, it's a little scary to think Batman takes at least 5 hits to take a thug down while in control of his mind, but as soon as he begins slipping they go down in 1, showing the increased aggression and anger put behind the attacks. On the flip side, it's important to note that he clearly isn't that far gone because he's still able to navigate the Asylum to reach his destinations, and as we already know, it could be much worse. Dr. Penelope Young actually managed to get a psych evaluation out of Crane during their paths crossing at the Asylum. The following is that report. Dr. Penelope Young, Scarecrow, real name Dr. Jonathan Crane. Possibly one of my greatest successes here at the Asylum. Despite his tendency for extensive roleplay, oddly common for Gotham City's criminals, it's unclear to me why Dr. Crane was ever considered insane. In our long discussions, I've been impressed with his genius for psychology and biochemistry, and I fully believe that if presented with a stock of his fear-inducing gas, he would feel no compulsion to use it. He seems to have entirely turned away from his former life of crime as the Scarecrow. Additional notes, he's valiantly battled a history of anxiety disorder due to a difficult childhood and adulthood trauma through an intense study of psychology and the causes of fear. I've come to believe that the accusations that he experimented on human subjects are wildly exaggerated. Genius at chemistry. Would he have something to contribute to Titan research? Attributes. Genius in chemistry and psychology. Creator of a fear-inducing gas that causes nightmarish hallucinations and fatal cardiac arrest. Obsessed with creating fear in others. Cares only for results in his twisted experiments. End of report. It's interesting to know Crane showed that he could be rehabilitated, even convincing Young he could be trusted with fear toxin and that he wouldn't use it. Whether this is a sign of good things or an elaborate lie is unknown, but considering the following events in the series, we can consume his bullshitting here. But it's important to note there's a chance he did show some signs of getting better since, as we discussed earlier, Crane's sadistic nature is a personality trait and not a set mental illness, something Young notes when she says she's unclear as to why he was ever considered insane, meaning that in theory he should be easier to treat than some of Batman's other rogues, given that personality traits can change on a dime. I also find it funny that Young notes that Crane has a tendency for extensive roleplay. After Arkham Asylum, Crane goes MIA, with many presuming he's dead after the Asylum incident, but despite his terrible injuries sustained at the hands of Killer Croc, he manages to swim out to Gotham Bay and survives by floating to Gotham using a crate of discarded Titan formula, where he'd receive some sort of medical attention to his injuries, which include, but are not limited to, a broken leg which couldn't be repaired due to the grip strength of Killer Croc shattering the bone, facial disfiguration that puts Two-Face to shame, with Crane now missing basically all of his teeth, not being able to see out of his right eye, and adding on top of that, he was missing a huge chunk of his nose and lips. So, that being said, he came out pretty well considering the circumstances. Despite being the one stupid enough to walk into Killer Croc's lair and begin shouting plans to poison the water supply, Crane blamed Batman for his injuries, and over the coming years would begin formulating a plan to bring the Dark Knight down once and for all, despite the fact that without Batman's help, he'd have almost certainly died. Anyway, Crane decided he didn't seek for Batman's death physically, more spiritually. He wanted to unmask Batman on live TV and show not only Gotham, but the world, that their hero was nothing more than a man controlled by his fear like everyone else. During the development of Batman Arkham City, Crane had a lightbulb moment. All of Gotham's criminals rounded up into one singular section of the city, with plentiful room to hide and test gas with no repercussions. Sounds perfect. So this was where Crane would set up, out of the public eye for a while, using a boat in the Falcone crime family's docks, which Crane requested be filled with insects and toxins, with his newfound real estate, including a lab in the back rooms of Mr. Chen's toy factory and the top floor of a building he built a gas chamber in, with tech for two-way communication. Crane began formulating his magnum opus, the toxin that would break the Bat. As time passed, the world pretty much came to the idea that Croc had killed Crane. However, neither Batman nor Oracle, Barbara Gordon, believed he had completely vanished, and Batman was set on finding evidence that he was dead, or at least where his corpse ended up. Something he wouldn't find, though, as Scarecrow was testing subjects for his toxin. This is where he'd find Roach. Roach was one of the Joker's most loyal followers and would become subject to Crane's experiments in the hull of the boat, where, after stumbling upon a hidden frequency using the cryptographic sequencer, Batman would find him. Batman studies Roach before he wakes up, lets out a horrifying scream, and subsequently dies from the experiments and shock. In here, Batman finds a shipping manifest and some other evidence of Crane's presence, but he was nowhere to be found, presumably finding a way to escape from Arkham City soon before the events of the game. Using the cryptographic sequencer again, Batman also found 3 different frequencies which each relayed an A1Z26 cipher, or a code where every number is substituted for its numerical position in the alphabet. For example, if we were to spell out the word Batman, that would be 2, 1, 20, 13, 1, 14, and these codes read out the message: I will return Batman, you will pay for what you have done to me, and fear will tear Gotham to shreds, all hinting towards a return somewhere down the line. In another part of Gotham, though, Penguin hired Mr. Hammer and Mr. Sickle, the 2 brothers we take down in Arkham City, to track down Scarecrow, hoping to bring him into his crew and restore some order to Gotham. But Crane was ahead of them and led the Russians straight into a trap at his hideout in Chinatown, where they found a Scarecrow dressed like Batman hanging from the ceiling. Sickle made the mistake of smashing some bottles in Crane's lab, releasing a strain of fear toxin which then trapped the 2 brothers in a nightmare, seeing visions of their father trying to kill them. Scarecrow tortured them for days, using their strength and willpower to test just how lethal the toxin had become, hoping this would be the strain to take down Batman. When he was done, he sewed them back together, something they had always wanted since being separated before the events of Arkham City, and then stuffed Sickle's mouth with straw. Then he sent them back to the Penguin as a message. Crane needed better resources for his experiments, so he partnered with Simon Stagg, founder of Stagg Industries, and after months of work, he developed a new strain of fear toxin that could be absorbed through the skin, making gas masks completely useless. Together, they also worked on a new device called the Cloudburst, a massive device designed to spread the toxin as a giant cloud. It was powered by a Nimbus cell, which acted as sort of an EMP, shutting down any electronics not powered by the cell. But Stagg had his own plans in the background. He wanted to reverse engineer the toxin to cure depression. Seriously, Stagg just wanted to cure the mental health crisis. What a guy. He had no interest in Crane's weird obsession with revenge against Batman, and he was willing to steal the formula if necessary. But after 2 years of isolation, Crane's mind deteriorated even further than it already had. He was no longer the cackling mad scientist we met in the Asylum. Now he was quiet, more focused, but in the end he was still obsessed with fear. He believed fear was the driving force behind everything, even Batman himself, which, when you think about it, does have some weight to it. His plans were bigger than just Gotham though. He wanted to cover the entire eastern coast in his toxin, turning it into his own twisted kingdom of fear. If he wasn't stopped, the whole world would eventually fall into chaos, and the world would truly, much like him, know what real fear is. At some point, Crane underwent actual surgery to reconstruct his face, but instead of fixing it, the procedure left him looking even more horrifying. His face now resembled his old mask, ironically enough, his jaw stitched together with thick threads, with two gas mask-like tubes attached to either side. Some believed he had taken a knife to his own face, and others presumed it was just an incredibly well-made mask. Then came the meeting which would put into action the events in Arkham Knight. Penguin, Two-Face, Riddler, and even Harley Quinn all gathered to hear Scarecrow's plan. He told them that if they worked together, they could finally take Batman down and claim Gotham for themselves. Poison Ivy was there too, but she wanted no part of it. Scarecrow didn't give her a choice though. He knocked her out and locked her in a gas chamber at his hideout in Chinatown, using her as a test subject for his fear toxin. That way she couldn't use her pheromones to control his men, and she would be rendered pretty much useless. Scarecrow had already set his plan in motion. He met with the Riddler in private, playing to his ego and convincing him to launch his own challenge against Batman on Halloween night. Meanwhile, Harley and Penguin broke Ivy out of Bloodhaven PD, hoping to use her to make the toxin even stronger, which are the events we play through in the Harley Quinn Story Pack DLC. It is worth noting this does take place before Scarecrow locked her in a gas chamber. Once Gotham was evacuated, the city would belong to them. Batman and the GCPD would be completely outnumbered, outgunned, and overall completely overwhelmed. To fund the militia, Scarecrow and the others paid the Arkham Knight $3 billion. Deathstroke also joined them, acting as a commander and strategist. He was the toughest opponent Batman had ever faced after all, and with him on their side, the Knight's army would be pretty much unstoppable. Then came their final move. The Arkham Knight revealed that Barbara Gordon was working with Batman. If they took her, it would break Batman's alliance with Commissioner Gordon, leaving both of them reckless and vulnerable. Scarecrow loved the idea. It was perfect. Nothing could hurt Batman more than fear. Crane's plan seemed flawless on paper, and I think this speaks to his smarts more than anything. I think there's a lot to be said for Crane still being inside Scarecrow somewhere, because despite the clear disassociation, he's still smart and switched on. And I think one factor of Scarecrow's overarching villainy is actually his absence. In Arkham City, we don't know where he is, meaning if you play Arkham City with the headcanon of him being in the prison, the game becomes much more unsettling. Scarecrow genuinely scares us into being scared of the mere thought of him showing up, and that right there is true villainy. His lack of regard for human life is also a fascinating place to go, as it's genuinely terrifying. He's able to subdue Mr. Hammer and Mr. Sickle and torture them for days before killing them and stuffing Sickle with straw. Scarecrow proves he's just plain evil. No real motivation aside from the lingering hatred for Batman, and this leads to our final chapter, Batman Arkham Knight. Don't worry though, this won't be a whole plot retelling of the game. No, I want to focus on 3 scenes in particular. The first being the standoff between Gordon, Batman and Crane while he threatens to push Barbara off the roof. This scene to me is the embodiment of the Scarecrow character, because by all metrics he has Batman cornered here. He's so close to proving his point, and if it wasn't for the fact he's facing Arkham vs. Batman, he'd have probably broken Batman with the death of Barbara and betrayal of Gordon, because they were 2 of his last remaining family who could be saved, and after the reveal of Jason being the Knight, even Batman's mind must be confused at this point. Him making Gordon shoot Batman is one of his best displays of being in, as he says, complete control. He masterminds the whole situation to perfection, turning Batman's usual room-controlling presence and making him nothing more than a cog in his machine for victory. When he tells Jim he knows his greatest fear, failing to protect Barbara before he ends up pushing her off the roof, it feels like he genuinely has this all figured out. He wants Gordon to not only feel the failure, but live in it. He wants him to wallow in his fear, knowing that no one can save him or her now. They're alone, and Batman, the one man who could have done anything about it, is dead, having been killed by Jim moments earlier. And if Jim hadn't mapped out his shot and given Batman a chance to escape from the roof by shooting his symbol and giving him time to move around the building to catch Barbara, Scarecrow might have had a chance to realise this victory. Crane really leans into fear controlling our every action here, and in the next scene I wanted to cover. Because from the moment Jim turns the gun on Batman, he's being controlled by the thought of losing Barbara, and although we know he never intended to kill Batman, which he obviously doesn't, shooting his bat symbol instead of him in the head, it goes to show that deep down he would have gone through with it if it meant keeping his family safe. Every action, word and line spoken from the moment he turns the gun on Batman shows Scarecrow is right. Scarecrow does what Joker never could. He shows the people of Gotham that a man can turn into the worst version of themselves by making a few bad choices. Joker went about this in The Dark Knight by trying to force the hard decisions out of people who weren't in positions to make those decisions, turning them into monsters through manipulation and the thought of self-preservation. But Scarecrow goes right for the jugular, using the one thing that most people can't control: fear. He uses this to get us what he wants because at the end of the day, he knows that fear is something people will never truly overcome. We can't be scared of nothing because our minds are wired to protect us from these things, and no matter how much training you go through, everyone is afraid of something, and this just amplifies this to the nth degree. The next scene I want to touch on also features Barbara, and obviously if you played the game you know where this is going. Batman finds Barbara in the gassing chamber where he locates Poison Ivy earlier in the game, and after being gassed, Barbara shoots herself over facing the nightmare Batman she sees. We later find out that this didn't happen at all, but for a second we see Batman truly broken. For a second, Crane wins again. In the immediate aftermath of Barbara's supposed suicide, we see Batman drop to his knees, broken over the loss of Barbara in such a cruel manner, forced to shoot herself to save herself from him. It's quite interesting to note that there's a few little tells that show us Barbara isn't dead, both involving the Joker funnily enough. The first being that when Barbara begins turning for the gun, Joker, not real by the way, pushes it towards her, showing this is all in Batman's head, because an obviously not physically there Joker couldn't push an obviously real gun anywhere, given his lack of physical form. And the second thing is, we never actually see Barbara die. I know that sounds stupid because we see the body, but we never see her shoot herself because Joker gets in the way, and we never see the moment she dies, and in the aftermath she's just kind of there. Like there's no blood or signs of death, and in a game rated 18+, and that deals with mutilation, body horror and graphic violence, this seemed a weird choice until you know the truth. Barb's suicide brings into question the dangers of being associated with Batman, but more importantly brings the mission he's on into question. How can Batman save Gotham when he can't even save his own family? Similar to the doubts in Arkham Origins about not being able to protect his own home, let alone Gotham, we see Bruce realise he can't save everyone. But he quickly snaps back into mission mode because he has to. But we know he's still broken, he's not quite himself after this, because in one moment his fears were exposed. Scarecrow now knows the Knight isn't bluffing when he said Batman's weakness were those closest to him. He finds Batman's weak spot, and this leads to our finale, the unmasking of Batman. This scene is the final straw for Batman, as for all intensive purposes, Scarecrow actually does win here. He's the only one to have completely broken and killed Batman this explicitly. After taking enough fear toxin to wipe out about 100 people and being unmasked to the world as Bruce Wayne, Bruce tells Scarecrow he still isn't scared, and although this might be true, the second Scarecrow took off the mask, it didn't matter if he was scared. He did what Joker couldn't do, what Bane failed to do, what Black Mask failed to do. He killed Batman. Not physically, but spiritually. He took away Batman's mystique, the idea that he was anything more than a man driven by fear, controlling fears in others to control his own, and make up for the fear that he felt as a child. Scarecrow, in his crowning moment, finally beats Batman. We don't need to go over every detail of this scene, because a lot of it isn't entirely relevant to this video, but we need to praise Crane because he has Batman in his palm for the whole last 10 minutes of the game, showing Batman he's actually walking proof of his theory. Batman is beaten, as Crane says, not because of what he's done to Gotham City, covering it in fear toxin and taking it over. Great work, by the way, another track on Scarecrow's greatest hits tour. But he beat him by knowing what he'll do to those closest to Batman. Them being Robin, who was only able to be kidnapped because Batman was scared he'd get himself killed and so locked him in a cell, and Jim Gordon, who was only there because Batman was too scared to let Jim in on the secret that Barbara was working with Batman until it was too late and she was kidnapped. Scarecrow wins because of not what he has done, but the thought of what he will do, and this is where he shines. Despite Crane ultimately getting his shit rocked by Gordon and thrown into Arkham when it reopens as a shell of his former self, Scarecrow to me is Arkham's true villain. He is the anti-Batman, using fear, harnessing its powers for nothing but to inflict the feeling of pain on as many people as possible. He strips the legend of Batman down to its core, and by the end of the night, the lingering effects left on both Bruce and Batman means that Scarecrow's questioning of the mythos and his desires to break it down were both ultimately brought to fruition, as Batman is no longer seen as a god among men, no longer an omnipresent force of justice in a city filled with injustice. Instead, he's just Bruce Wayne. But from the ashes of what Batman was, came the Batman Gotham would fear even more. Their relaxed state seeing Batman, knowing him for what he really is, would eventually come back to bite them, as he comes back worse, more fearful and scarier than ever. Batman is reborn from Scarecrow's actions as something worse than Crane could ever fathom. I can't remember where I heard it, but I once heard Scarecrow being described as Batman's greatest fear. Batman controls fear and he understands it, he respects it, but Scarecrow is the ultimate form of fear. He is fear incarnate, and Batman can never truly scare Scarecrow until he pumps him with fear toxin. You can't make fear fear you. Making Crane more powerful than any of Batman's foes, because no matter what, he just can't crack him. He can't make him cower in fear because Crane simply isn't scared of anything. Jonathan Crane, Scarecrow, to me, is the best villain in the Arkham series. He sets so many things into motion. Harvey Dent becoming Two-Face, Gotham being abandoned, Bruce being outed and Batman being broken, and then Batman ultimately joining the Justice League. All of this brought about by Scarecrow. Batman may not be truly afraid of anything on the outside, but on the inside he is. It's losing his family, watching them die by his hands. And obviously, he's scared of fear itself. But if Scarecrow is fear incarnate, then Batman only truly has one thing to fear, and that is fear itself. Thank you so much for watching. I've loved making this video and it's been a complete slog to make because this audio kept messing up, I couldn't get footage, my capture card wouldn't work, so it's been a great experience overall. But no, seriously, everything's fixed now, so we should be back on track. So thank you for watching, I'll see you next time, I hope you enjoyed, subscribe, like, and goodbye.
You failed. Now suffer.